Hi everyone, so nice to have all of you. Thank you so much for coming. So we're the Gordon Fellows. So we did a fellowship this summer where we explored an internship in city planning, or like civil service or government or something related to the urban studies disciplines. Jock Gordon generously provided us a grant to do this internship. It's designed for an unpaid internship so we can explore different fields of study without the constraints financial stuff. And so, yeah, so now at the end, we have a culminating event that we do to kind of teach everybody what we've learned, and just give back to the community after we've gotten this experience from our internship. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay, so a little bit about our event first. This is about Market East and what the future of Market East is going to hold. Basically, if some of you know, some of you might not know, there was a fight over the 76th Place Arena and whether it should be built in the heart of like Center City bordering Chinatown. It's an area called Market East. So these are 4 scholars, activists, consultants who have had experience with the project and maybe like, you know, like advancing it or maybe like dissuading people from advancing it. So in 2024, the Philadelphia 76ers announced a plan to build a $1.3 billion arena named 76th Place. And it was on Market Street between 10th and 11th Streets. And it occupied a portion of the Fashion District in Philadelphia and the adjacent former Greyhound bus terminal. The goal was to revitalize the struggling Market East corridor and bring economic benefits to the city, but the plan faced significant opposition from a myriad of activists, community groups, particularly those close to or in Chinatown. And they believed that it would lead to further displacement and gentrification in the city. So despite receiving approval from the Philadelphia City Council in December 2024, the 76ers ended up backing out of it in January 2025 and decided they were abandoning the downtown arena project.
So to kind of build upon what Lucia said, development in Market East has always had ripple effects on Chinatown. We saw this with urban renewal projects like the Vine Street Expressway back in the 20th century, and more recently with the proposed arena. But now with that plan behind us, the question is what's next for Market East? How will new development engage with Chinatown's residents, businesses, and community life? What lessons can we take from the arena proposal and from its ultimate cancellation? And looking forward, what would it mean to create development in Market East that is not only successful, but equitable? Development that balances commercial space with housing, community centers, and transportation. What hurdles stand in the way of that vision, and how do we begin to overcome them?
We are very fortunate to have 4 speakers to join us to hopefully shed light on these quite broad, pressing questions. We're joined by Allison Lowe, who is going to join us in just a few minutes. She is the co-chair of the Save Chinatown Coalition's Technical Planning Committee. Professor Rashida Ang is the chair of undergraduate architecture and a professor at Penn's Weitzman School of Design. Professor John Cromer is a planning and development consultant and an instructor in urban development policy here at Penn. And Sarah Yoon is the founder of Sojourner Consulting and the former director of planning at Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation. She is also an urban studies alum.
So yeah, I guess just to begin, we'd love for you guys to all talk about and introduce just how your work in scholarship kind of engages and also is in tangent with. So we can go like one by one, or if someone has something very strongly, start us off.
All right, I can start since I stay right next to you. I worked for 9 years in Philly Chinatown for the local CDC. So during that time was very steeped in planning and development matters. And then once I started my consultancy, Sojourner Consulting, a lot of my projects have continued to take place within Chinatown and other cultural communities. And then in 2023, 2 years ago, I was one of the partners on the 2023 community impact study for the 76ers arena. So that included Market East and Chinatown, as well as Washington Square West.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here, and I'm so happy to see so many people here. You all did a really great job. I'm Rashida, and I'm an architect and an educator, and a lot of my work and my interests are around spatial justice issues and their intersection with design, climate, community displacement, and those kinds of things. And I was invited, I guess a few years ago, now, a couple of years ago, to partner with Chinatown for the Arena Alternatives workshop, which was a public workshop. I think we had almost 150 people there to really consider alternatives to the 76ers place proposal. And since that time, really until this summer, continue to work with the Coalition to Save Chinatown on visioning images and kind of carrying some of those ideas that were generated in that public workshop forward into the website that was published over and launched over the summer.
I'm John Cromer, and many years ago, I was Director of Housing in the Ed Rendell administration, during which some funding was made available to finance affordable housing on a very small scale in Chinatown. I ran the Camden, New Jersey Redevelopment Agency for a year during a period of state receivership. And I've done some consulting work in a number of small cities in Pennsylvania, all of which have disinvestment problems. And this applies to Philadelphia and Camden as well, but problems in which there's not enough funding, there's not enough agreement on what should be done, and there are people that are not going to be satisfied at the end of the process. So that's the perspective I bring to this discussion.
Well, thank you guys so much for giving like an introduction. I think one of the first things that whenever us four were like sitting down to think about like what next after the 76 arenas is just like what potential like opportunities are involved there. So we wanted to ask, now that the proposed arena is not getting built in Market East, what would successful and equitable development there look like in terms of commercial space, housing, community centers, transportation, etc. And just on a broader note, if you could guarantee like one component of a future plan, what would that look like?
I'm not gonna go first every time.
Well, I think we learned a few things about what not to do. Number one is never let the developer lead the planning process. And that mistake is made over and over again. It was made in Camden and made not a few times in Philadelphia. And the thing to do is listen. And I expect you've all had experience with that. I'd be interested in knowing if the priorities of the community have been covered sufficiently through the work that's been done now, up till now, or if there's more sort of listening and dialogue with the community and in the community that's needed in order to go forward. And the third thing is my understanding, and I'm at a distance from what's going on at the administration now, is that the mayor doesn't feel that she's a sort of dominant figure in planning and needs to be holding the reins. And I'm not sure that anybody in her administration is that way either. I'm not sure that's a terrible problem, but what that means is that there's a need to get people who do have expertise and who have been leaders to get into the dialogue again, not to get them not to have them be the decision makers, but learn from their advice and comments. That really wasn't possible with respect to the arena because it appeared that the decision had been made. There was no point in listening.
I can build on that response. And for me, I think there are two things. And one is related to the process and the other is related to the product. And really, as Professor Cromer just said, I think it needs to be a process that engages the community from the beginning. And to come to City of Philadelphia, Chinatown, and neighboring communities and say, we've already figured this out, this is where it's going to be, is actually a recipe for disaster for the city and also for particularly for those that are living proximity to the project. So the other thing that I've learned is that people know what they want. And a lot of times neighborhoods are put into a kind of position, particularly if the developer leads the process where resistance and opposition is necessary because of the way the process was engaged. But if we were to reverse that and actually begin to engage people before decisions are made, I think a lot would come good from that. So one of the things that came out of the workshop, I guess it was a couple of years ago, January 2024, is that we really don't, the idea that we're going to demolish the fabric of our city and just continue to kind of tear buildings down is problematic. It's problematic in terms of energy and material waste. It's problematic in terms of the kind of disruption that that causes for city blocks. And it's also problematic just from a historical perspective and maintaining the kind of cultural fabric of the city. The Fashion District building is not a great piece of architecture, in my opinion. But one of the things that we proposed in the workshop is we had the possibility to rethink how to use that building and how to begin to puncture it. And we refer to it often as like Swiss cheesing the building. So making a lot more openings at the street level, particularly so that it becomes Market East can be a much more pedestrian friendly building. We also started to think about opening it up to like having an open air plan, because a suburban typology of a big box mall actually is terrible for the urban fabric of. So in some of the renderings, you can see maybe the idea that the building could be reused, and you could reuse the structure, you could reclad it, but you could also change the penetrations. And it's complex because you've got the regional rail lines that are running behind it. We thought about, and this came actually from the community, a lot of ideas about using the rooftop and adding in housing. But there is some assertion that the structure of the building could also carry additional load. So there are really exciting ideas about reusing what's a pretty awful and gloomy kind of building within the city in ways that are really exciting and can reflect the character of the city, and also promote small businesses and a lot of small things and some little things and some medium-sized things with a lot of opportunities for people to kind of engage the fabric of the city.
So when I worked as a community developer, I spent a lot of time thinking about what are the answers, very practical, low resources. And you really just want to get to the solutions for the crises at hand. As a consultant, I now spend a lot of time thinking about what are the right questions. And so this question kind of makes me wonder, we talk a lot about solutions for Market East, but one of the challenges in working in that neighborhood is that there's not a community that is tangible for folks to engage with. And even though there's been a rapid growth in the residential community in that immediate neighborhood, there isn't anyone that speaks for them. And I think everybody finds that very frustrating, as well as a vacuum for people to fill, right? And so I think, one of the questions for this thought about equitable development is who's there that will be the most impacted, beyond residents. One of I think the most critical current functions of Market East is that it's one of the city's 3 transit hubs, right? And so we do hear a lot about that, and any discussion of Market East does start with that recognition. But to think about from the perspective of the folks that have to use that hub, regardless of the condition it's in or what's around it, as well as the folks that have to work around that hub. In the gallery, fashion district, or in the neighboring blocks where there's a good number of huge economic anchors, Jefferson Hospital being one of them. There are a lot of folks that are really directly impacted by what happens in that neighborhood. And so I think equitable development starts with asking that community, what is it that they are experiencing, and what would help the most from their perspective.
Thank you all for sharing. I think it really helps to put a sense of, we really need this like engagement before, and like even in the before steps of the project, and we really can't let all of these projects be driven by like only the developers' voices, whether that be like through the community members, the residents, business members, whoever are all there. I also really liked, Rashida, you talked about like this open air plan and this like idea of Swiss cheesing and finding like little entryways of how we can re-envision like fashion district into something more like usable. And then you briefly talked about how you organized in 2024 this reimagining the proposal arena plan, and you led this design visioning exercise, which resulted in these images on the People's Visions for Market East's website. And you work really heavily with the intersection of architecture, social equity, and environmental justice. So we were wondering, what are some ways that we can construct Market East and also just different developments more sustainably?
I think going back to the question of just retaining building structures when we can and reimagining them. And that's a problem that we have in the United States. A lot of other countries don't have the same problem. We don't build buildings as temporary, 50-year structures. We think about them, they think about them as much more durable and much more permanent. So I think that's a place to begin. It isn't to say that we should never tear anything down, and it isn't to say that a building's life is static, but it is to say that there's often something very useful within a building, and to retain it. And so one of the problems that I see, like from the perspective of the architecture of Market East, is you have a really wide street. It is a transit hub. It's not particularly pedestrian friendly. And then the way that the fashion district is monitored, even some of the doors to stores actually aren't real doors. You can't go in them. And if you're under 18, you may not be able to go in any of the doors. So we have these kind of facades and these parts of the street that are heavily inactivated. They're impenetrable. We, I think, made a mistake, and there were a lot of protests around the constructions, or you called it the gallery. I have a really hard time calling it fashion district, because when I was a kid, it was the gallery up around those buildings when they were initially constructed. But they're there now. And if we knowing the things that we know about urban design and about what can activate those buildings, bringing more green, more living things to the building, which is something that came out really heavily. We had these beautiful sketches that people had making the fashion district like into a garden, into an interior garden. Some really kind of exciting ideas. So bringing more green is going to help temper the heat that you feel when you're walking down Market Street. I think bringing more openings into the building, but we also looked at things like, how can you activate the street in a more temporal way? So are there things that can come and go away so that you can actually have different scales of like a kiosk or something? I may not have the means to have a storefront, but maybe I want to have just a little bit of a cart. And there's a great tradition in Philadelphia around street vending. So these things that are very much the kind of fabric and texture of Philadelphia, but they also belong in our cities and can really activate them.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying about kind of examining the suburbanization of urban space and kind of reversing that and making it accessible for everybody in the city to enjoy. Just kidding, Allison. No matter their age or maybe like their socioeconomic status, and kind of just opening this up for everybody to enjoy downtown Philly, or I should say Center City, more specifically Market East. So speaking of public space, Sarah, you consulted on the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation's Future Histories project. So can you tell us a little bit more about this project and kind of the role of public space in the development of Market East?
Sure. Chinatown Future Histories, it was a partnership between the local CDC and the national policy organization Policy Link. And it was sort of a hybrid type of project where the community was looking forward to its 150th birthday. So looking backwards at the history of the neighborhood, especially that period around urban renewal that has shaped a lot of the neighborhood's current built environment. Thinking about what does equitable development mean for Chinatown, and then thinking about the future of the community, especially as it relates to public spaces and the streets and sidewalks, and its current framework of gentrification. So like I said, it was like, that's kind of a mouthful, but it was, capacity building. It was, a deep dive into the past in order to plan for the future. And it was also, in the end, a convening vehicle to bring together decision makers, different leaders across the city to talk about the role of public spaces in equitable development. But one thing that, I want to bring to the Market East discussion about that project was we trained community leaders through this year-long effort to give neighborhood walks around their experiences of the neighborhood, and as it relates to these historic projects and as it relates to their hopes for the future. And so I think that became a through line in the project that gave us a backbone to arrange all of our other efforts around, so that when we convened folks at the end, we had community leaders bringing foundation program officers, folks from the city, folks from other community groups, and showing them these experiences. And you're in Center City, you're in the heart of the city, but the experiences of everyday community members make you look at place in a different way. And so, for example, walking up 11th Street between Convention Center and Chinatown, a kind of boundary line. If you've ever walked on that corridor, you'll know that where the west side of the street is, where Convention Center ends, there's this sort of dead pedestrian zone, because the original storefronts that were designed there are not active as retail spaces. And so we heard community members share about their recollection of the construction of that project, because it was, not too long ago, ended in the early 2000s, I think, about about the perspective of businesses, small businesses who complain about the lack of wayfinding signage between the Convention Center and Chinatown. So even though you're stone's throw away, your typical conventioneer might walk across the street to Reading Terminal, but they have no idea what's to the east of the Convention Center. And then just to come out of the hustle and bustle of 10th Street, if you've walked down 10th under the gate and felt that kind of vibrancy and the sense of life. And then if you spend time on 11th Street, you see sort of, this book ending of a lack of life. And so, having that discussion about why, grounded in the experience of somebody that doesn't have a stake in its outcome in the same way as a decision maker does. It makes you just take some time. It takes some space out of the process, beyond asking, you know, what is it that the community needs? What is it that we should dedicate our resources to? Which I think, you know, for Market East, that kind of just pedestrian experience and that taking of space is something that can really transform your perspective into a challenge like that.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much, Allison, for coming. I'm so sorry that you're like trained and everything, but yeah, I just wanted to give everyone like a reminder. Allison is the co-chair of the Save Chinatown's Coalition's Technical Planning Committee. And not to put you on the spot or anything, but we started off the panel with just like a simple introduction of how your work or your scholarship kind of engages and intersects with Market East and Chinatown.
Sure. Hey everyone. Again, sorry for being late, SEPTA and like granted. Yeah, so I'm co-chair of the Save Chinatown Coalition, sort of stepped into the role in the past year. But historically, we are just a group of volunteers who are some technical professionals in the urban planning, design kind of realm of things. It really came together when the proposed 76 place arena came to news. And so a group of us kind of looking at how the city was dealing with the process, for example, like the impact studies, what questions to ask in the impact studies, sort of raising that to the city and making sure the community has a stake in the process. So it's been like a, 3-year-long fight. I think after the arena was not, arena plans were scrapped. Now, what we're trying to do is be more in a proactive place when it comes to Market East, instead of always like reacting to what developers are trying to propose in the area. With Professor Ng, hosted a workshop in 2024 with students to come up with these charrette plans and a community engagement process. We were able to have those plans and create a people's vision. So we have a set of principles of what we want to see in this place, what we imagine, what we want for the future. We spent 3 years saying no, like what are we saying yes to? So here we're just pushing along, trying to keep tabs, trying to let them know that we're still here and being proactive.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself and for being here with us. So Professor Cromer, the next question is for you. You previously worked as the former Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of Philadelphia Mayor Ed Rendell, and you directed the city's neighborhood reinvestment programs, managing the $120 million annual budget, which is a lot of money. So how do you envision investment and private-public partnerships in Market East is the first part of it. And then the second is, what do you think are some financing strategies that we can use that will work well in Market East?
Well, with regard to the second question, City Council recently approved $800 million worth of bond financing as part of the budget process, and the sort of scope of eligible activities is pretty broad. So this is not a case like 20 years ago where the question is, where can we find the money? Layer up all the sources of funding that we need. That's not to say that it'll be easy, but it's different, and money is apparently no longer a problem. I think one important thing to look at the front end is how to make use of the existing assets and the existing opportunities. And I know all of you are familiar with one of the important existing assets, and that's the Roundhouse. It's been studied to death. I think a lot of the research work, a lot of the planning work has been completed. I think there's an opportunity for affordable housing, a mixed income housing, and the proximity to the Chinatown community really makes it different from any other housing proposal that we might come up with. Not to say that there would not be other opportunities, but that's a big one. In addition, Philadelphia still, after a lot of discussion and debate, has a need for a big exciting transportation center that's well located, that is in the center of things, that draws people into the city and that is fun to be in. In addition, I think there's a huge opportunity for an expanded, enhanced welcoming center, and there is one already, but it's not prominent enough. Again, it needs to be central, and welcoming should include not only immigrants, but people that are moving here from other places in the US or elsewhere. So asking the question of what's the most ambitious plan for a welcoming center that we could imagine at this location? What's the most ambitious plan for a transportation center that we could come up with? I think would be a very sort of front end activity.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. Allison, you kind of talked about this initially, but you were really involved in the development of the People's Vision for Chinatown, which is an anti-arena coalition that advocates for green spaces, housing, and social services for Market East. We were wondering if you could describe the process of developing that plan and the role of community engagement in the future development in Market East.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, a lot of it was building off of the Penn workshop. That workshop had, a 2,000 person survey response from across the city, and it had about 100 to 200 people in the workshop itself. And with the development of People's Vision, we really wanted to emphasize that this was the beginning of the community engagement process. This is something we still have to do very thoughtfully and thoroughly. There's things like language access and accessibility that we're addressing in terms of, we're talking to in Chinatown with community members, but also, the people who live in the neighborhood are involved in this and other surrounding parts of Chinatown and Market East. And what we heard often again and again with these type of workshops and surveys was that people really want something that celebrates sort of like the local culture and the diversity of Philly. Arts and culture was really emphasized. How do we support the local economy? Reading Terminal is right there. How do we build upon that? I think this was really an exercise for people to imagine greater. Oftentimes in these like downtown developments, we get constrained by what we have seen, which is mostly big retail box stores. But how do we bring in the conversation and have people be excited about what we can imagine in this space and what really serves the community, the city? Because this isn't just a Chinatown area. This is, again, a transportation center, like you said, where everyone uses as a hub. But yeah, we're still in the process.
Yeah, in terms of activism, leads perfectly into our next question. The cancellation of the arena plan came after years of extensive protests and grassroots advocacy. This is a question for all of you. So to what extent do you think this decision was rooted in public opinion? And do you think it seemed primarily from business interests that it didn't happen in the end? Or do you think it was because of grassroots or maybe a combination of business interests and grassroots movements? And then what does this kind of protest say about further activism in Market East, Chinatown, or on campus at Penn as students? So open to all of you, very
I think this mayor, particularly in terms of her interest in the building trades perspective, would have rolled ahead with that original plan, regardless of community sentiment. And my guess is that the major reason why it didn't proceed was that over time, more people came to understand that it doesn't work in terms of generating the economic benefits. And I was glad to see a study that was completed not long ago in which a team looked at every similar kind of recreational facility that had as its development goals some kinds of economic development benefits, whether it would be jobs or tax ratables or something else. They looked at everything and none of them worked. So somebody should have read that. So that's I think that's my guess about it.
I agree with you. And I also think, despite the really great work of the technical committee of the Save Chinatown Coalition, the city wasn't actually listening to the community and even listening to the studies and the facts. There was this, it was sort of, in my opinion, a kind of governing from this state of scarcity, where it felt like we need, if a developer wants to give Philadelphia something, we need to take it. And I think it's a really dangerous place to be in. And, the facts were on the side of the community. The ideas were on the side of the community, but I'm not, and we're gonna claim the win. But I don't know, I actually think it was an embarrassing moment for the city of Philadelphia and for our legislators. And if you watch some of the press conferences that happened after it was announced, it was so evident. And I'm not going to tell you how I felt about that. But I think we should learn from this moment. And we should learn from what is now another embarrassing piece of history for our city, and really understand that there are so many really wonderful ways to resist the kind of commodification of our city, and the commodification of housing, and the commodification of just, space to recreate. And like the idea of third space came up a lot in the survey and in the work from the workshop. There's so many really great ideas, and hopefully our lawmakers will, and maybe even some developers will learn from this experience and say, maybe we can work with, instead of just kind of moving forward, which with what were pretty poor ideas from the beginning.
No pressure.
I think in terms of the question, I don't know, no one really knows. In terms of the discussion around activism and future lessons, I thought it was really interesting that this project served as such a flashpoint. And to me, at some point in time, I was like, no more op-eds, I'm not reading another one. It just felt like everyone in the city was talking about it for a long time. And what felt different about this fight versus other fights in the history, particularly for Chinatown, where I had experienced them firsthand, was that it felt like more of a litmus test. I think it some ways reflected the really polarized nature of political discussion and our lack of ability to hold it. But it felt like there's a lot of really interesting debate, but a lot of the debate didn't serve to generate more debate, just to shut down debate. And I remember being on another project around the same time in Southwest Philadelphia, which is under construction right now. It's they call it the Bellwether District, and it's the largest project in the history of the city of Philadelphia. I think at the time it was a $2 trillion budget. I don't know, when you get to numbers that big, they become meaningless. But the site is also enormous. I mean, I took a well, not a walk, but a drive around. They had to drive me around, and I think you can see it from space. But there was I think there was like one op-ed. Inga wrote an op-ed, and that was it. And I remember, being staffed on the arena project and being staffed on the Bellwether project, and the difference in the public spotlight and the activist activity was really striking to me. I mean, there were different projects, don't get me wrong. They weren't the same thing at all, but there were a lot of very similar issues at stake. And there was similarly you know, a low-income community of color that had been there for a long time and suffered the negative impacts of what was there before, and questions around community benefit. So to me, you know, the lessons learned part of the question, you know, I wonder, it's not a lesson per se, but I wonder, you know, how we can have these sorts of public forums and still be able to get to the matter at hand and be able to apply those matters across, you know, all of the important and challenging issues for the city.
Yeah, I agree with everyone here. I think ultimately, yes, it was extremely embarrassing for the city. We're taking it as a win because I think in a way it has gotten a lot of people civically engaged with the development process in the city, and you know, where city council meets, like all of those nitty-gritty things. But at the end of the day, yeah, I do think of the 3 billionaire developers who were in charge of this project. Really only one was like the representative, David Edelman. He would like show up on Zoom and do all these things, and it was like sort of his pet project. The 2 other developers never really showed up ever. And I think that for them, this asset was just part of their portfolio. This was going to be an easy win. Like, we're going to get this, great, until it wasn't. So I think there's a point about like putting pressure from different angles, like from the city, from the community, from different neighborhoods, from, you know, the Jefferson Medicine facilities, from, you know, the SEPTA, like all these things eventually created some sort of pressure. I wouldn't say that it led to it not being built, but I think there's something about the whole activism and getting people to care about these things, because I think from the beginning, we've been talking about how this is just an example of predatory development that's happening across the city. There's the Bellwether District, there's West Philly housing, and then we have this arena here. So, yeah, 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate how you all kind of like form or like phrase this question in a sense of like, it is a win, but at the end of the day, it is like an embarrassing stake for the city. And this like small win is just gonna like open doors for hopefully like other areas that are also being just as impacted as Market East. Which leads on to like our next question, Professor Ang. The arena, as we can see, is obviously a clear example of the dangers of this top-down planning, or like putting developers first. And I know that you've researched and talked about participatory design models. Could you explain this concept? How can it apply to Market East and also other developments across Philly?
And I think the idea of participatory design is one kind of maybe a provocation and a prompt to architects who and the ways that we educate architects to think about design as being sort of our as a result of our creative genius. Maybe kind of challenging that notion and saying, well, maybe, you know, being an architect and particularly being a responsible one isn't so much about you, but maybe you're a facilitator, maybe design, not maybe, design is political, and that it can participate in many ways with the people that will use the building and beyond the idea of designing for a client. So if I have a contractual relationship with the client, that's my responsibility, but maybe we have these other responsibilities to just the health of the city and the people that walk by the building, and not just really thinking about the kind of more direct financial contractual relationship. So the way that I think about participatory design is as a kind of reframing of what design is and who the kind of author is of a particular project, and that we can, as an architect, I can be a facilitator of ideas and can kind of take that we can all be designers. But my role is to begin to kind of synthesize a lot of good ideas into something that maybe doesn't make everyone happy, but has a kind of civic consideration of a lot of different competing variables. So for me, it changes the way that I would engage with students and thinking about, well, how are they going to meet that professional and ethical responsibility within their careers? And it's a provocation to my profession to say, well, maybe we can actually do things a little bit differently. Maybe we shouldn't kind of design behind closed doors and then present it to the community, but maybe we can have more participatory processes along the way before the decisions are made.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of your responses and your response that you just gave. This is our final question. So we wanted to ask all of you how students can get involved in these types of processes. What are the next steps community members can take in making their opinions heard when it comes to planning decisions in Market East, and any advice you have for us in general as Penn students and maybe people interested in urban studies or urban planning. Open to all of you, any of you.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking for volunteers. I started as a volunteer, I recognize many of you here. But yeah, we're people's vision. We're trying to do a more robust community engagement process. I think any help would be appreciated. This is where, we really get into the neighborhood, but also try to create some different modes of engagement that aren't just a survey, because we don't want people to feel like they're just being studied and there's just survey after survey. So that's what we've been working on. Yeah, advice. I got a master's in city planning here. Like I moved to Chinatown right after I graduated. I was like, well, I want to do something on the ground. So I just started volunteering, going to folk arts cultural school. They had like a monthly meeting. I would just keep showing up. And here I am, co-chair of the technical committee. So I've met a lot of great people too, friends and so on. So yeah, feel free to come talk to me, or yeah.
Well, I don't know how this would be structured, but you could figure it out. Finding a good way to get Prima Katari Gupta, the head of the Center City District, involved could be very helpful. They are not a heavy hitter, but they are very knowledgeable about what's going on and have a very realistic view of some of the opportunities. She has a background that would not be unfamiliar to many of you. She was preceded by Paul Levy, who was a dynamic person, but who was not that comfortable in a room full of people like this room. She is. So I'm not saying that she's the key to all this, but I think there's an asset here that did not exist 2 years ago.
I'm sorry, do you want to go? Going down the line.
Oh, right. Going back in this direction. I mean, I think it goes back to just making sure that decision makers know this continues to be a priority, and holding events like this one to keep the issue in the air, but also having discourse with others like Prima and CCB, other organizations who have different audiences and perspectives than Penn has. It's really helpful to just make sure it's kind of in the air, that folks like, Councilman Squella, whose district Market East is in, the Department of Planning and Development, and the new leadership over there, to continue to be invited to these discussions. I think all of these things are really important to just make sure that, the city knows this is a priority. Because when they don't hear about something, then you lose a lot of the incentive to do something about it. I think as John mentioned in the initial part of our conversation, this really should be a city-led process where engagement can be really robust and also very transparent.
So I guess I would put my educator hat on for a moment, because I see some of my students in the audience and say, I would encourage you to, one, be critical, bring a critical eye to your coursework, to your faculty, challenge us to challenge the things that you're learning, and then begin to try to make connections between those things that you're learning and those theories to the ways that they may apply to the city that we live in, the city where you're from. So drawing those connections and really holding us accountable to help you make those connections, I think is a really great place to start as a student, and not kind of accepting the things that you may read for as truth, but to continue to be critical in that way. And I think I would also echo what Allison said a moment ago, which was just looking for opportunities to get involved. So there are a lot of really wonderful opportunities. We hired a bunch of students to make that workshop possible, I should say. It was not something that I did. Honestly, I didn't do much, but there are a lot of really talented and energized and passionate students that participated in that and made that happen in a really short period of time. So I would look for those opportunities through CURF. Here at Penn, there are a lot of opportunities that are available to you if you want to get involved and, be present and volunteer.
For sharing that. Yeah, there's a lot of like great opportunities for Penn students out there. Like, I know Allison, you said this before, but just like reiterating to like reach out to Allison if like you are able to volunteer. Especially like us having such a big stake at Penn. I feel like there's a lot of like privilege that we have. So making sure that we're like able to use this in like supportive ways. But those were all of the questions that us four kind of like thought of. We would now like to open it up to the audience if there's other questions. I know there's like a lot of stuff we didn't cover. But yeah, we just wanted to take this time to answer other questions or take other questions from the audience members.
Hi, thank you all for a very interesting and engaging conversation. My name is Tom. I'm a second year historic preservation student. And my question is, going back to a more conceptual level, what is Market East to all of you? So for the past 2 years, I've kept an eye on Chinatown's history, but also what's happening in the news. I think in terms of newspaper reporting of Market East, it is a spotlight method of tackling individual areas such as the financial district, the Wanamaker building, East Market development, the Girard Center. However, there is this lack of collective imagination of what a collective identity for Market East really is. And my question is, in a longer sense, how do we imagine Market East as a whole, or should we embrace the area as a more fragmented version of what it used to be, the 9 department store commercial destination that no longer is here anymore? Yeah.
Question.
It's a great question.
I guess I can start. Yeah, those are really, that's like the crux of this panel, I feel like, answering this question. How I see Market East is it's the southern flank of Chinatown, northern flank of the neighborhood. It's a transportation hub. it could be a welcoming center. It's really that through line of connecting Chinatown neighborhood to the rest of the city. So I think having it fragmented as it is now is really a disservice to the entire city. I think there's a lot of potential. Yeah, there is a crisis in collective imagination of what can go on in that area. So yeah, I think it's an important piece of the city. It's also rich in history. Fashion District was the first urban mall in America. Or not Fashion District, the gallery area. So there's like a lot of history to it. Yeah. I don't know if I answered all those questions.
So I have a thought about that, and I'm a little skeptical of a kind of idea that we're gonna kind of just give or overlay a kind of identity onto a city, and we're gonna kind of design it all at once, or we're gonna give it a name. I mean, when the Fashion District was renamed the Fashion District, it was one of the iterations to try to brand it in a way that was gonna ensure its success, and it didn't. And it hasn't. So in my mind, some of the challenges that Market East has could be thought of as an asset if we begin to think of it as a tapestry, and understanding the kind of layered history, and even maybe uncovering that and saying that this is going to be a place that reflects Philadelphia in an authentic way, in a historical way, maybe even in a reparative way. But it's going to allow for a lot of small things, instead of saying we're gonna make this the blank district, and we're gonna, build a lot of buildings of a particular type, and that's gonna somehow solve everything and knit everything together. I think there's great harm when we've kind of done that in cities, when we've kind of erased some of the history. So for me, an analogy of a tapestry, or a kind of knitting together of things of different sizes that engage different parts of the city, I think could be a productive way to start. And the other thing that I would add is the survey that was taken, and all of the responses came from across the city. So this is a part of Philadelphia that a lot of people really care a lot about. And certainly a lot of responses from Chinatown, but a lot of responses elsewhere. And that's also a real strength, that people, because there's a lot of land and a lot of kind of possibility. So it isn't a district, in my mind, that will be held together well by any one thing. And cities actually don't thrive by having, a lot of one thing isolated from other things. They thrive by kind of working as an ecosystem. So I think if we begin to approach development on Market East as a tapestry, as a knitting together, really thinking about lots of different program types, that's a great place to start. And the character comes from that tapestry, rather than being kind of overlaid, in some really shiny singular plan and vision for the city. So it's a kind of collective.
I would tend to agree with Rashida. There's a lot of strong assets that Market East has right now that are not able to shine. And it still remains a very solidly middle-class shopping destination. Post-COVID, everybody is talking about converting commercial into residential buildings. And Philly certainly has a head start compared to other downtowns in big cities, in that we already have had that residential base, and Market East, that base is only growing. So I think, design is particularly important for the neighborhood, because design does knit the fabric together, and it allows for those individual strengths to play off each other, and to be able to contribute to a more cohesive whole.
Sounds like this would be a great location for an international design competition. We would weave together everything roughly between 8th Street and Broad Street. This sort of easy response to your comment, I think, would be to say, well, Market East is the connector between the City Hall area and Independence Park. But really, if you think about that humongous federal court building on the north side, there's one block, and then the post office on the south side, nothing's going on with that real estate. There's no way you're going to make that exciting. So thinking more about the cluster of opportunities between 8th Street and City Hall, and possibly opportunities to the north and south might be the way to go. But there's so much at play now that I think it would be wrong to say, well, obviously the mayor or the planning commission or the new director of development has to decide, and opening it up and seeing what happens. Some great things have been developed in Philadelphia as a result of design competitions, and this would be a way of attracting attention to the city, particularly during 2026.
Maybe that is just the solution then. Does anyone else have any other further questions?
Hi, yeah, just for, hi, my name is Marco, thank you for being here. Just for some context, I'm doing like a study right now actually on like how stakeholders are imagining like brick and mortar retail post-COVID, like through the lens of like different city development projects within market. So that's my case study. So I was wondering, and I think my question is more targeted towards Professor Yoshida, since you mentioned that you've been thinking a lot about like how to reimagine like that industry. Are there any other like retail locations within Market East that you've sort of started brainstorming about how to like revitalize, or yeah, any other ideas?
The work that we did was actually very much focused on the sites that were scheduled to be developed as a part of 76ers Place, because it was really designed as a political activism strategy. But the ideas that were generated actually were far too many to even, just occupy those blocks. But we actually were doing that work for a long time and not actually sure when we were gonna release it publicly, because of the kind of really thinking through, and this was the thinking of others, but understanding like what the political landscape is. So we really heavily focused on like the block of the fashion district that was targeted and the Greyhound site, in terms of all of the work that we were doing, because that was at that time, that was the fight. And then one of the things that we had to do after the city abandoned that proposal was to say, how do we actually, there are a lot of good ideas, and now there's a kind of vacuum. And I think one of the concerns that I heard, that I shared, was the idea that, oh, there are no good ideas for what can happen in Market East. So let's just wait for the next developer to kind of tell us. So the People's Vision really was released, I think, as a counter proposal to that narrative, but we didn't do a comprehensive study of Market East, at least in the work that I was participating in.
Anyone else have any questions? Good.
Hi, my name is Federico, I'm an urban studies major here at Penn, and I was wondering, are there maybe any examples of a project in Philly or outside of Philly that could provide like a good blueprint of how a project should be done?
Well, when folks talk about Market East, they tend to all point to the same project on 11th and Market Street. Name of it's escaping me right now. Anybody? The new development between East Market, yes. Yes, it's very confusing name. East Market. Now, everybody tends to point to that as sort of the model that the rest of Market East should follow. But in a lot of ways, developments are just a product of their circumstances, and East Market had a lot of great circumstances that they were able to leverage. So, that includes the ability to build sort of this vast underground cavernous set of tunnels for back of house uses like loading and parking, and the ability to be able to create that interconnected plaza in the center of the buildings. So I think everyone recognizes what they want success to look like in Market East, and also in the future of Center City. But Market East is a very challenging place to do that kind of work, and especially because there's so much vacancy and underutilization of parcels currently, so much change in the development environment. I think there's a reason that the city has leaned upon developers to help to catalyze the revitalization of that neighborhood. So it does have to be a public-private partnership in order to move forward.
Yeah, very, very different landscapes and contexts, but the Kensington Corridor Trust is an example where the neighborhood has sort of this collective ownership and control of what commercial businesses get to be in that strip of, I think it's Kensington Avenue. We've been talking to them and hearing about like how they've been able to finance, how they were able to go through that process. I mean, a lot of it was buying up the vacant storefronts there. It's very different from Market East, which is very much in the hands of, speculative market and big real estate developers. But I think another example that we've knitted in, and also we heard a lot from the survey, was people really like the Bach building. It was, a former school, and now it's like a maker space, and you get all these local artists and bakeries and all these different types of activities going on there that really show sort of the creative, like local nature of Philly. And I think that's been sort of a piece that people have been like, oh, we want to see this in this space. Like, how can we do that? What can we do to make that happen? Also, Reading Terminal has been a really good example of that too. So. That's right. And I was really compelled by your discussion of participatory design models for architects. And Allison, your point about the Bach building, and it being redeveloped by an architect. I was just wondering, is there like a coalition or kind of critical mass of developers that maybe take that tack toward their work? Like, we have a lot of students in our sort of real estate certificate program here. In Philadelphia, does that landscape exist? Are there partner or developers that the city partners with that sort of keep that sort of civic goal in mind when they're doing their work? Or is it just sort of bottom line thinking in Philadelphia, kind of profit driven motives in terms of the redevelopment of former public buildings and private buildings that are being adaptively reused?
I do know that there are some really civic minded developers in Philadelphia. They're not, I don't know of many, but I think those developers are out there, and maybe we need more. I think Philadelphia, from my perspective, is a really challenging place to do that kind of work. And I think that there are opportunities for us to change the legislative landscape for more kind of socially minded development, where we're not just gonna develop from a kind of perspective of profit, but we're gonna actually have other metrics of of success and make it easier for kind of other like community land trust models to which have had a hard time in Philadelphia actually taking hold. I think there are opportunities. Maybe that's another way to put it. There are other opportunities for us to change the development landscape around that kind of thinking.
Frequently, when there's an issue relating to a development project, the question is, what does the mayor want to do? Or what does the director of the department want to do? And if the answer is the mayor hasn't decided yet, or, you know, we don't know, you've got an immediate problem. So an effort like that isn't going to take off unless there's clear political leadership on the part of the mayor or someone that the mayor authorizes for them.
You want to take one more question before? Yeah, all the way in the back.
Let me know if you can't hear me. I was just wondering, I know the school district is currently undergoing like reassessment of their school buildings and figuring out which ones they're gonna keep open and closed. And there's a lot of schools sort of in the East Market area. I know like Fax Charter Schools in that area. My understanding is that Central's building used to be there a really, really long time ago near the Wanamaker building. I'm wondering what you guys think the role of other sort of like the city's land portfolio and other city branches could be in the future of East Market. So it's like education space.
There isn't a public school that has real estate owned by the city. But the cluster of properties down the east side of Chinatown, between Chinatown and Franklin Square Park, is the only remaining significant cluster of publicly owned land in that part, the eastern side of Center City. And so, as John pointed out, folks have been waiting for a long time for decision makers to think about how they want to release or RFP those parcels or develop. Some of them are owned by PRA of the Redevelopment Authority. Some of them are owned by the Department of Public Property. But regardless, you know, they comprise a sort of critical mass that could be really impactful to jumpstart something meaningful there. And there's a number of stakeholders in that area too that have been interested in taking some role in those projects. But again, I think it does come down to when the city will decide to release those parcels, and if they will be willing to release them for less than market value, which is how projects like the Bach Building come about, or other socially minded developments. Is when you have the room to maneuver in terms of including more social goals to your project.
If there's, no other questions, if we could like give our lovely panelists a big round of applause. So much for coming. This discussion is like being recorded. So feel free to like take a look at it afterwards. But yes, thank you all for coming. This is like all the programming we had.
And if you want more food, it's in the urban studies office before we lock it up. So feel free to get more.
I'm sorry, and I was remiss to say this earlier, but if you are an undergraduate and a major or minor in urban studies, you are eligible to become a Gordon Fellow. It is provided by the gift of Jacques Gordon, who was an alum, and it's intended to pay for unpaid or underpaid internships in any city in the continental US in the summers for public service oriented internships. And those have really ranged. I mean, I know Siona was doing impact investing. We've had students doing organizing in Chinatown and research, housing. There's a real range and sort of, broad definition of public service that we take into account. But if you are interested, please, get involved. We have applications due in April, and you're always welcome to come talk to me about it. Thank you so much to our panel. We're really grateful for your time, especially late in the evening. And thank you all.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.